Hi, and welcome back to my channel. We're ready to do some cutting and sewing today. We're going to start on Unit A, which are the diamond wedding ring arcs on the Autumn Pines quilt. And we're going to be cutting out the fabrics, getting them organized, and then we're going to start sewing. I'm going to show you how to do the TRP lines that are on the units themselves. And there's also TRP lines on the little center background piece that we'll need to put on before we sew all those together. So grab your fabrics and your papers and let's get started on the first unit of the Autumn Pines. I've got the two bags with ALBR, which I have my fabric and most of my templates in there. And then we've got the ARBL bag. These are the two bags that we'll be working with today. And I'll go ahead and pull out the fabric and the templates. We'll start with ALBR bag first. And then grab your pattern, and we're going to be following along on page 5 and page 6. So on page 5, it's going to go through showing how to cut out your strips. So we'll refer to that as we're cutting, and then which bags they go into. So let's grab out our 2.5-inch strips. Set the other ones aside for now. So mine are all in order. I've got S1 through S8. And what we have to do is cut each of these strips in half. So let's lay those out. Just lay them on top of each other so we can make sure that both halves of the strip are going to be the same. We'll be able to get 21 inches out of both halves because that's what we need, a minimum of 21 inches. Okay, so I'll flip these over. Should have S1 on top and S8 on the bottom. Then I'm going to measure these out on my mat here. So these are all about 43 to 44 inches, so that's good. We need to keep a little piece of each of the colors so we can glue those onto our units. I'll show you how to do that once we cut these in half. So I'm going to cut my salvages off on this side. Not very much there. And we'll cut at 21 inches. And again at 42 down here. All right. So we need to make sure we have a stack of the colors so we can put those on our units. Okay. So I'll just kind of put these off to the side for now. So I've got 4 stacks, and that's so I can put the little fabric strips on each of our papers there. So now if you go down to step 3, it says after the strips are numbered, they're cut in half. Then we're going to stack the strips as shown, starting with color 1 on the bottom and stack the first 4 pieces. So we're going to have color 1, 2, 3, and 4, but we're going to flip them over because we start sewing with fabric 4. So we're going to do that with both sets, like that. And we'll leave the other ones where they are. So the AL and BR units, so just double check on your papers to make sure that you have AL and BR, which I've got both of those here. And what we're going to do with these little pieces of fabric, if you look on the papers, section 1 is color 4, section 2 is color 3, section 3 is color 2, and section 4 is color 1. So I'm going to take my repositionable glue. You could use a fabric glue pen if you wanted to, but I'm going to basically just stick a piece of this. So color 1 is the lightest color. And color 2, oh, I don't have a very big piece of that. Here we go. Color 2. You got to make sure you put them in the right order. Color 1 is actually section 4. Color 2 is section 3. Color 3 is section 2. And color 4, which is the orange here, is section 1. And we'll do that on both pieces. Okay, now that we've got those pieces of fabric taped on here, and basically what this is, it's just a guide. So when we're sewing, we want to make sure that we've got the right color strip that we're sewing. And we're just going to put that on the very first unit, and then put the paper clip back with the fabrics. We'll set that back by the bag, and then same thing with these both units. We're gonna put those back in the bag for now, and then since we have these strips right here, we're gonna go ahead and do the same thing to our units AR and BL, and same thing with the colors on there, except this one's a little bit different. So this one, color, the second group of 4 pieces are stacked as shown, starting with color 8 on the bottom and color 5 on the top. So we're going to leave these in the order that they are. I'll go ahead and put the fabric strips on here real quick, fast forward through that, and then I'll meet you back when I'm all done. Okay, I've got my little fabric strips put on there, and I know some of you are probably going to ask, well, do I really need to do that? No, you don't really need to do that if you don't want to. It's just a way to make sure that you're sewing the right color onto the right unit. If you don't want to put the fabric strips on, as long as you keep your strips in order, and you can sew them without those little pieces of fabric on there. It's just a little guide to help keep you organized and make sure we're sewing the units correctly. Okay, now that we've got those done, then we're going to go and look at the next steps after that. So we just finished step 6. So now we're going to go on to page 6, and we're looking at fabric S9 and S10. And we've already cut the 4-inch strip when we cut our fabric strips out. So now we're going to take both of those fabric strips, S9 and S10, and we'll lay those on top of each other. So I've got S10 on the bottom and S9 on the top. And the template layout sheets that we're going to use for those are these little diagonal pieces that look kind of like this. One says units AL and BL, and the other one is unit AR and BR. And we need to cut 3 pieces out of each of these fabrics. And let me show you how I'm going to go about doing that. Now I have batiks, so it's pretty easy to, there's really not necessarily a right side or a wrong side, but if you're not using batiks and you're using regular cotton prints, you just need to make sure that you're always keeping your fabrics right side up. So I'm going to take my template and I'm going to put a little bit of repositionable glue on that. And I'm going to place that right there on this side. And for this unit, we need to cut 3 sections out. So I'm going to cut that. And The nice thing about some of these templates, when they're at an angle like that, you can flip it over and you've got the same angle. And then we'll flip this over one last time. Okay, so now we've got 3 pieces of each color, and what I'm going to do is just stack the same colors together. So got the rust color for me, yellow. Okay. Then I'll stack those back on top of each other. And we're going to take this template back, and it has a cut line on it, so we're going to slice right down the middle. And then I'm going to take a couple of paper clips. So you're going to want to have your paper clips close by. These are all, hate it when that happens. So all right, so I'm just going to set those aside for now. That's for AL and BL. AR and BR. So now I'm going to do the same exact thing. Basically, they're just the difference between a right unit and a left unit. So the angle is just a different, it's a different angle. So we'll do, cut out 3 pieces on this side using the same technique. And we want to cut these on the solid line. So if for some reason you had trimmed out your papers and left a little bit to the side, kind of like I have, you can trim those papers so it's right on this solid black line. And flip these over again. And one more time to get our 3rd cut. Okay. Now this is leftover scrap fabric, and like I said in my last video, I just keep my scrap fabrics kind of at the bottom of my project bag, and if I need to cut an extra piece, there's extras there. And then if I don't use them, then at the end of my project, I'll just put them in my big scrap bin and use them for a scrappy quilt or something. So we'll cut this one down the middle. Oops, I forgot to separate those colors out on this one. That's okay. We can do that real quickly. I'm going to put all 6 of the rust together and all 6 of the yellow together, because one of them, I believe S9, if we go back, S9 is going to be with units BR and AL, which is the burgundy. So, and then the yellow is S10, and that goes with AR and BL. Okay. So I'm just going to take a pen or a pencil and write on my paper here so I can remember that this orange fabric is S9 and this yellow fabric is S10. So then when I get to that section, then I'll have those. Okay, so for S9, that is going to be AL and BR. And for S10, and where I'm finding that is this little diagram right here. So it says what units they are, and there's S9 on the bottom there, and unit BL and AR are S10. So BL and BL. And those go into the AR BL bag. And then the S9, which is AL and BR, and put that in this bag, which is the lighter colors. So BR and AL are the lighter colors, and AR and BL are the darker colors. And so the lighter colors are on the bottom of our wedding ring, and the darker colors are on the top, which is what that is. Okay. Then let's go to the next fabric, which is S11 and S12. So let's lay these out. And so we need to cut 3 4 3/4 squares out of each color. And you should have 2 templates. One is for unit BL and one is for unit BR. And well, let's look back at this diagram. So S12 goes with BL. So BL goes with S12, and S11 is BR. And again, I'm referring to this little chart at the bottom here. So I have the BR template layout sheet, which is for yes. So this is S11, and this is S12. So for me, it really wouldn't matter if I accidentally swap the templates because I have batiks and I could flip them right side. But if you are not using batiks, make sure that you put these on the right fabrics. Otherwise, the angle of the cut is going to be the wrong way. So I'm going to put this on here. I'm not going to use the salvage end, but I have 2 stacked on top of each other. And then we'll cut that. And I'm just going to flip the fabric up and cut out one more rectangle here. Okay. Again, batiks, it doesn't matter, but if you're using non-batiks, make sure all of your rectangles are faced right side up when you're cutting them out. So then we're going to slice down the middle on cut line 1. And so we should have 6 total pieces. And I'm going to stack those on top of each other. And this is for BR. So I'm going to put that in the BR bag. And then we're going to do the exact same thing with S11. We're going to cut with the BL template and cut out. I'm just going to fold them over like this so I can cut out 4 at the same time. But again, make sure they're right side up. Let's do this. It's easier. Okay, and I only need 3, so I'm going to take 1 away. And then we're going to slice right down the middle on cut line 1. And that gives us 6 total pieces. And I'm going to put this in with unit BL. And the reason there's 6 pieces is because we have 6 units that we're going to be sewing. And then I will add these 2 fabrics, S11 and S12, to my scrap pile. And then the last couple fabrics that we have is A1 Okay, so fabric A1, this is going to be the little wings that are on the very bottom here. So we use template D and template C to cut those out. And that's going to be these pieces right here. And you have a piece that's more of a that's a kind of a diagonal. So we need to cut 6 pieces from template C and 6 pieces from template D out of our A1 fabric. And so what we are going to do is I'm going to cut these a little bit bigger than the actual template itself, because I have my diamond wedding ring templates, or my creative grid templates, that I'm going to use to cut out these after I cut the bigger strip out. And then I'm also going to use the C template, or E, template E, for the background pieces. So for right now, I'm just going to cut 6 pieces of this, which this is template C. And this is a template that I reused from a previous project. So I am just stacking these on top of each other and cutting them out, which I would suggest that you do the same with your paper templates, leaving them in the bigger kind of diagonal or rectangle. So I've got 6 pieces of that, and we're going to come back and cut this out one time, exactly the size of the template. To make sure that the bottom there is covering. And then we'll do the same with template D. And I had my piece of fabric folded in half, but again, these need to be cut right side up. So if you're using printed fabrics, then you'll probably just have to cut out six units along your strip, so you have them all right side up. I guess that's one advantage of using batiks in some of these Quiltworx quilts, is it's a little easier to cut the fabrics out because you don't have to worry about the right side. But when you're cutting with regular cotton fabrics, you need to make sure that you have the right side up. Okay, so if you do not have the creative grids, then what you're going to do is just very carefully, and I might get my smaller so I have more control, my 45 millimeter. You just want to cut out exactly along the outside line of these templates. Now, if you have the creative grids, or if you have a friend that has some you can borrow, then it's a lot easier, because I can put my template right on top and then just use that to easily cut all 6 of my pieces out. And even better, which I was meant to do this before I started cutting, is if you have a rotating mat, put them on your rotating mat, and that even makes it easier, so you don't have to lift the pieces of fabric up. You just rotate it around, trim around your template. Okay, and then there we are. We've got our template D cut out. I'll cut out template C real quick. And these are going to go with your lighter colored fabrics, the ALBR bag. So put those in your, oops, let's put a paper clip on it so they don't fall apart. And there's the other template. And the reason that these are kind of cut at an angle is because they are on the bias, and we will have a curved seam when we sew these onto our units. So just make sure you're keeping it along the outer edge. I tell you what, I've used these templates a lot, and I am not unhappy that I bought them. They come in very handy. It's same with the actual ARC units, which I don't know what template number it is, but when you go to trim, after we get done sewing our units, you have to trim all those papers. They're the exact same size as those units, and it so makes it so easy to trim your units. And I'm not affiliated or anything, so I don't get any money if you go buy them, but they sure make cutting everything out and trimming it up a lot easier. So, okay, so we got a couple more fabrics that we need to get to cut out our background pieces, which is, we're looking now at cutting the fabrics A2 and A3. This is still on page 6. So we cut out S9 and S10, then we cut out S11 and S12. We cut out fabric A1. Now we're to cutting fabric A2 and A3, and we're going to be cutting out, basically we need to cut 12 total pieces, because 6 that go between unit AL and BR, and 6 that go between AR and BL. So, all right. So both of these pieces should be exactly the same 5.5 inch strip. And so from each fabric A2 and A3, position the template, which is T template E. We're going to cut 6 pieces with each template, which, like I said, is a total of 12 pieces. So I have my strips folded in half, which is 4 layers. And if I just cut out 3 of these, that will give me 12. 4 times 3 is 12. Yep. So I'm just going to loosely cut these out. So there's 4. You get 2 of these paper templates in your papers. So we can use these to cut out. And I have that repositionable glue in there. Okay, and then I need to cut 2 more pieces. Or I'm sorry, one more group of 4. And again, these all need to be cut right side up. So make sure that your fabrics are correctly placed. Okay. So I'm going to put these in 2 groups of 6. So here's 4 and 2 is 6 for one template. And then 2 over here. Okay. So now on these templates, you're going to see these TRP lines on here. And you can do it several ways. You can, some people will just take their sewing machine and just mark the holes in their fabric without sewing, which that's not a bad idea. That way you don't have to worry about pulling all the threads out when you're done. You can use a marking pencil to just mark those dots on there. If you have the template, there's holes that actually have those marks lined up, so you could just take your template and put a pencil mark on all of those. Or you can sew through all of the units, like take this whole stack of 6 and just sew a basting stitch through all of those TRP lines, which is the way that I like to do it, because it does a couple things. It does mark all of those lines and it holds all the papers together. So let's go to the sewing machine. I'll show you how I do that, and then we'll come back and cut these out. Then we can actually start sewing on our A unit, on our wedding ring units with the strip piecing. I'm at the sewing machine and I'm going to set my machine up on a center stitch so I can follow the middle of my sewing pattern, and I'm going to move it to a basting stitch length of a 3.5. Those are pretty easy to. So then what I'm going to do is start from the inside of the line. So I'm just going to start here and sew all the way out, and start here and sew all the way out, and start here and sew all the way out. So I'll show you that real quick. Just line up your center line with that dashed TRP line, and we'll just sew a nice basting stitch, and I'm going to come right off the edge. Flip it around and we'll do the same basting stitch the other direction. And then same thing here. This last one on the top. Okay. And that's all there is to sewing the TRP lines on these templates. I'm going to sew the other one, and then we'll go back to the cutting table and cut these out on the outer line. I'm going to use my template, and I'll see you back at the cutting table. Okay, we're back at the sewing table, or I'm sorry, we're back at the cutting table. And since I know some of you probably don't have a template, I'm just going to show you how to cut this one without using my template, and then I'll cut the last one. So I'm just going to go real slow. We're cutting through 6 layers, so you want to make sure that you're putting enough pressure. I think I'll use my bigger one. Enough pressure to stay right on that outer black line. And we'll keep just nice and slow. It's not a race. And then since I've got my rotating mat, make sure we cut this point at the top there. So that's our smart corner to help us line up our pieces. Just have to be smooth and kind of give enough pressure to go through all those layers. And then last line is on the bottom here. Okay, so see, that's how you do it without the templates. And I'll quickly cut this one with the template. Alrighty, now, drum roll. It is time to start sewing our units. So grab your bags, get your sewing machine out, get your thread ready. I recommend that you use 100% cotton thread if possible. Whatever you have works, but cotton thread, in my opinion, works the best. So if you haven't seen the video about setting up your sewing machine, I'll leave a link up here in the upper left. So you can go watch that real quick on how to set up your sewing machine for paper piecing, and we'll see you at the machine. Okay, I'm sitting at the sewing machine, but I wanted to cover a couple things real quick. Make sure that you have a new needle in your machine, and that you have a small stitch length. And in Judy's pattern, she usually says set it to 1.7, but it depends on what type of machine you have. If you have a brother or a baby lock like I have, it only goes in increments of 2, so I can either go 1.6 or 1.8. I've tried 1.8. I don't like it. It's a little bit too big of a stitch, so I usually go to 1.6. If you have a Bernina or another machine that can go in 0.1 increments, then try 1.7. Just sew a couple pieces and see which stitch length works best for you. But we're going to be using a 6-inch at a quarter ruler and fold template. And we're going to start on bag AR and BL, which is your darker fabrics. And the reason we're not starting on the other unit is because you sew a few pieces on, then you have to stop and add those little side wings. So let's get into a block that is a little bit easier to sew for starters, and then we'll go to the other bag and show you how to do those wings. So down to the sewing machine we go. Okay, I have my AR and BL units here, and I think we'll start with unit AR first, and then we'll go over to unit BL. And so we're going to need to get out our little edge pieces here, which is this little unit here, and then we have our strips here. So if you've got a paper clip on them, go ahead and take the paper clip off and lay your strips out lengthwise. And we should have our strips in the order that are on your paper. So just double check if you've set this aside and haven't worked on it for a while. And so the way that strip piecing works, I'm going to kind of demonstrate this before we get to the sewing machine, is we're going to start off with 2 strips together, and I'm just going to pretend like I just have 2 strips there. Then what we're going to do is we're going to line it up. Well, so you pretend that this is under the sewing machine. We're going to line up our paper with this dashed line right here, which is your seam allowance line. The dashed line is going to be lined up right with the edge of the fabric. And we're going to be sewing all of our papers onto the strips. And this is kind of a different way of starting. Normally we would glue the first piece on, but we're not doing that in this case. We're actually going to be sewing the first 2 pieces together. And so we'll add that on, sew on the sew line, then we'll add the next piece right underneath it, and all 6 of these pieces. So you need to make sure that you're putting them close enough together that all 6 pieces will be able to fit on the on your strip. So if you leave too big of a gap, like if you leave a gap like that, you're not going to be able to fit all your pieces on. So when you're sewing them, make sure you're sewing them close enough together that they will all fit. So like here, here. So make sure, you could probably leave at maximum a 1/2 inch between them. Otherwise you'll be too far apart and won't have enough room. So, all right. Hopefully that gives you a little bit better view. So we're putting on the 3rd paper. Okay, see how this dashed line is being matched up with the edge of the fabric? I'm just going to keep on sewing. And last piece. Okay, so now you should have a long piece that looks like this. We just finished sewing our strip, and now what we need to do is take our rotary cutter and we're just going to trim in between each unit here, like this. And this last one. Now we should have the individual pieces like this. And we're going to take these over to the ironing board and we're going to press this red strip open, or this would be fabric number 6. So we're going to press that open. We'll do a finger press here. You want to make sure that you get these pieces nice and flat, because if there's any little, like say, for instance, if you tried to press it and you got a little crease in there, which wasn't nice and flat like that, see that this, see if I pull it tight, there's a good 1/8 of an inch there. That's not going to lay flat when you take the papers off. So you want to make sure that you get it nice and flat with the seam. And don't use your iron just to iron over to the side. You want to do a nice finger press and then hold your iron flat down. I'm going to go iron these real quick and I'll be right back. All right, back from the ironing board and got these pieces all pressed. So our next step is to use our add a quarter ruler, and we're going to trim on line 2. So we're going to take our add a quarter ruler, or our fold template, place it on the solid line and trim off this little bit of fabric here. Once all of our pieces are trimmed, then we're going to use our next strip, and just to confirm we've got the right color, the next strip is the green strip. So we'll grab this green strip and take that over to the sewing machine, and it's sort of the same when we do it this. Instead of the paper being open like this, we're just going to put the edge of this fabric that we just trimmed right along the edge of the new fabric. And the same thing, we'll just keep going one by one. I'll move the view so you can see better. All right, so we're at the machine here, and we're just going to start, we're lining up the fabric that we just trimmed, that red fabric, with the edge of the strip. And we're just going to sew these on the line 2. Grab the next piece. Keep them about a 1/2 inch apart. Or no more than 1/2 inch apart, because otherwise you'll run out of room on the strip. And we don't want that to happen. All right, same thing. We're going to cut in between each of these pieces and then take it over and iron that strip we just sewed down. Just trim in between the middle of these. And there's probably going to be a little piece of fabric like that in between. Then we'll go and iron this green piece back and come back and use our add a quarter ruler. So it's basically trim sew, press. So right now we're going to the press, and then we'll come back and do the trim with the add a quarter ruler, sew, and then press again. That's kind of rinse and repeat. It's what everybody says, but we'll go iron these down real quick and be back for our last strip. We're back from the pressing table, and now we're gonna trim on line 3. So let's go through and do line 3 real quick. After you trim on line 3, then we're going to use our last strip, which I'm checking my fabric colors, and my last strip is this rust color. So same thing as we did before, we're going to line the fabric right up with the edge and sew on line 3. So I'm going to do that real quick. No sense in making you watch every single thing that I sew, and then we'll be back and I'll show you the last step. Okay, we've sewn on all 4 of our strips. And the last piece that we need to do is this little corner strip here. What we are going to do is we're going to trim on line 4, and then I'll show you how to line up this template piece, and that will be the last piece that we sew on this ring unit. So let's do the trimming real quick, and we'll come back and show you how to place that piece. On this template, there is a sew side. And then I'm going to take this off. If you look at your piece when you fold it over, there's a triangle here, which is actually oriented this way. So we're going to take a piece with the sew side facing away from you, and we're going to line up so our previous piece matches up with that. And now if you have a piece that's really light compared to a dark, you're going to want to move it up just a little bit so the light color shows behind the back. Now both of my colors are not too terribly drastic, but the reason that you would do this is so then when you iron over this piece that we're putting on, section 5, that you don't get the shadowing of that dark color through. If you had the dark color and just peered over the top like that, and then you ironed it, you're going to see that little piece of the dark fabric. So that's just a tip for if you have a really light fabric that goes underneath, then you want to make sure that the light is standing tall behind the dark. So I'm going to set these all up so I can chain piece them. And I'm leaving about a half inch to 3/4 of an inch on either side of my paper of fabric. So that makes sure that I have good coverage. Off to the sewing machine. All right, we've done all the sewing of all the pieces on our AR unit. Now the next thing to do would be to trim around the outer edges, and then we got to do something with our TRP lines, and I'm going to show you what I'm going to do. So let's go ahead and get these trimmed up. Okay, we have unit BL here, and we're going to be sewing it just like we did the previous unit, where we take the first 2 strips, sew them together, and then I'm going to show you how to do section 5 and section 6 here.
So go ahead and go and sew your units, putting the first 2 strips together, the blue strip and the red strip like I have on mine, so whatever your fabric 5 and fabric 6 is, and then we'll come back to the sewing machine when we're done with your 4th strip, and I'm going to show you how to put on this last unit here, this section 6, which is different than the previous unit. So go sew those and I'll meet you back here in a minute. Okay, I just wanted to come back real quick. I'm on unit BL and I'm getting ready to sew on section 5, and then I'll show you how to do section 6, but I just wanted to make sure that you knew when you're sewing on line 4 for section 5, there's this intersection here, and what you want to do is start at the edge and sew just past this dashed line here, and then cut your threads, and I'll show you what that looks like here. And the reason for that is when you go to trim on line 5, it will trim off those threads in the back when we sew just slightly past that dashed line here. So I'm going to sew a couple stitches past. And so that's kind of what it should look like. See how I have a couple stitches past this dashed line here, if you can see that, hopefully. And then that fabric there covers section 5, and then when we're done, we'll come back and trim on line 5. All right, we're ready to trim on line 5 here, and this one, since it has this line that crosses over, what we're gonna do is, or what I like to do, is line up my fold template. And instead of just folding just the paper, I actually fold the fabric over as well, like this, because see that seam there? Now we have to pull that back from the paper a little bit. If you try to just pull the paper up and rip it off of the fabric, a lot of times it rips the paper. So that's kind of my little trick when you have those intersecting seams across that line. It just, if you try to do the paper like this, it just doesn't work. So my tip is to just fold all of your fabric over, hold on to your paper with your left hand, or if you're right-handed, it'll be reversed, and then just grab where this seam is and pull it back, and it should lay nice and flat. Now we're ready to put on section 6, and this template is one that we cut out for unit BL, and if you see on the front here it has a sew side. You want that facing away from you, and we'll take the paper off here, and basically what we're going to do is grab a fabric, and we want to cover this whole section here. So if you lay that on top of the fabric, you can see I want to make sure that I have enough coverage on this corner and enough coverage up here. So I might pull this down a little bit. That way that's covered. So we'll lay all these pieces out. So here are the units after we've sewn the unit or section 6 on, and we've pressed them. So now we're going to get ready to trim the blocks, and I'm using my rotating mat, and going to go ahead and use my templates on these. So I'm going to go ahead and trim these real quick, and I'll meet you at the end when we're all done trimming.
So all of my pieces are sewn and trimmed, and we've got the basting stitches on. So now the next step, if you reference your pattern, page 9 at the top left corner, it talks about curved piecing with the T template E, which is this background piece here. So basically how we're going to do that is we're going to take one of these background pieces and sew it to this side, matching up these TRP lines. And then once that's sewn and pressed, then we'll bring this piece in and we'll sew those together, making one whole unit. So before we sew them together though, the first step in there says remove all the foundation papers. I will post a video in one of the corners up here, tips that I've made, a video on tips to remove the papers. But so I'll go ahead and remove the papers. I'm just going to show you how to do one unit, and then that should be enough so we don't have to sew all the units together, and show you how I deal with the TRP lines, and we'll get this unit sewn together. So the fabric has been, or the foundation paper has been removed from the back on both of these pieces. And on the background template, I've removed the basting stitches. The nice thing about a really light fabric like this is you can see those holes that the needle made going in. So the darker fabrics, it's a little harder to see the basting line. So I'm going to leave those stitches in there and line it up and glue it. And then before I sew the piece, I will remove those basting stitches. So if you watched a previous video that I put together about sewing a curved seam, the way that we're going to sew this is anytime you have a curve, the frown part is always down and right sides together. The smile part is up on the top. So these are right sides together, and these are also smart corners. So you can match this angle of your unit up with I'm just going to put a little dab of fabric glue there, and I'm going to match that corner. And that's where this basting stitch went through. So I'll pull that out. And then these basting stitches here, match those up, glue those down. And the nice thing here is this is the bobbin thread, and that pulls out pretty easily. So I'll just pull that out. And then we're going to kind of just work this around the corner. We're going to match up the bottom corner so it sits on there nice and flat. And then we just have to work this corner. Just kind of massage the fabrics in there. All right, so that's glued down. Now we're going to go to the sewing machine, and instead of using our stitch that we've been using for sewing the paper piecing together, we're going to set it up to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance and sew this together. One tip that I like to talk about is when you go to set up your 1/4 inch seam allowance, whatever machine you have, what I like to do is put a piece of the paper underneath and put the edge of my presser foot up, and I'll drop my needle down, and it should match up exactly with that line because that is a 1/4 inch line. So I'm going to bump it over to the right just one more. Yeah. So if you can do that on your machine and set a piece of paper under there, drop the needle down so it comes right exactly onto that 1/4 inch line, there's your 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I like to also start my projects or start my sewing with a paper starter. It just kind of seems to make the so it doesn't get all falling down into the sewing machine and get tangled up. So, all right. Just going to sew a nice 1/4 inch seam allowance going around that curve. And we're going to come off. All right. So that point should be right here, which it is. And that looks pretty good. So I'm going to go press this, and according to the pressing instructions on the pattern, we need to iron it with we'll iron it this way so the seam allowance will go in like this. So I'm going to go press this, and we'll come back and we'll line up the other side. This side goes on the same way. This is your curved seam right here. So we're going to, this is the frowny part, this is the smiley part. So this is on top, right sides together. And we'll do the same thing. We'll match up those basting stitch lines. So this one right here, match that up. Then I'll take those stitches out. You can leave the stitches in if you want. It's just a lot harder to take them out once you've sewn over top of them. And then up here, this is a smart corner, so this angle should match. You can see that there. So I'll put a little dab of glue. And then here's another, the basting stitch at the top matches up with this corner here. And when you put your fabric glue on, you just want to put a little dab and try to keep it within the 1/4 inch seam allowance, because we don't want that fabric glue to show once you open it up and press it. You don't want ugly fabric glue to be showing on your pretty fabric. So just try to keep it within that seam allowance. We'll go sew this, and I'll bring it back when it's all pressed and show you what the final product looks like. And here she is, the finished block of so this is our AR and BL units with the background piece sewn in the middle. So just as a refresher, you sew the background first to this piece here, which is your AR unit, so that curved seam, and then you will come back and sew this on to the background piece, matching up your basting stitches and the smart corners. So those smart corners work out really nice. It leaves nice sharp points. If you match it up correctly, you should have a nice sharp point right here in the middle. And so that is half of our diamond wedding ring unit. There's only one little difference in the other units that I will go over really quick. The sewing is exactly the same. You sew your strips on the same. But on that unit, we also have the side little wings like this that get sewn on. And when you're doing your units, you basically put on the first 3 strips, and then you sew this on, and then you finish the paper piecing. So that's the difference. So I'll go through one unit real quick with you, show you how to sew this piece on after we've done the 3 strips. So this will be our lower unit of the diamond ring, which is our lighter fabrics. So let me get that all set up, and I'll come back when I've have the 3 strips sewn on and show you how to sew on this side piece here. Okay, I've sewn all 3 strips on the AL unit, and basically you go ahead and trim your add a quarter, use your add a quarter to trim on line 3, and then we also have to come back and trim off the outside, and we'll just do that real quick. Now on your on the outer side, what I've been doing is I just kind of come in a little bit above where the fabric is, because you don't want to cut all of the paper off because you still have a couple pieces to sew on. So I just kind of slide in a little early like that, and then trim the rest of this, because this outside here is where we're sewing on the D template. So that's what that should look like. And then we'll take one of these D templates, and it should go on just like that. I'm going to go press this real quick. Okay, so basically this is just a little bit of a curved seam, and the easiest way to do it is just to match up. You've got your frown on the bottom, smile on the top. I'm going to take a little bit of fabric glue. Again, make sure that the fabric glue is within your 1/4 inch seam allowance, and match up the top here at that top edge. And then we'll do the same thing down here. Match that bottom edge. And then you just have to work this curve with just a little bit of glue, and sticking before it can slide up. So just kind of massage that in there a little bit and get it stuck down. Okay. And then we'll go to the sewing machine and set our sewing machine back to our 1/4 inch seam allowance and sew along this curve. And then the pressing instructions have you press to the outside like this. So let me sew that real quick. All right, so we're just going to sew our 1/4 inch seam allowance right along the edge here. And with the curved seam, just go slow. I just kind of hold the fabric back with my fingers. Then once you kind of get towards the bottom, you kind of have to work this little flap here. But if you keep within your 1/4 inch seam allowance, just go slow so we don't get any pleats. All right. And that's what your seam should look like there. 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then we'll go press this back and show you what that looks like. All right, that's what she looks like after it's all pressed. And then all you have to do is finish sewing the 4th strip and put on section 5, which is that little corner tip. So let me readjust the camera and we'll sew those on together, and then I'll do one more little video to show you the other side of the, so this is AL, so that would be unit BR. Okay, when we sew on our 4th strip, we've already got line 3 trimmed at the quarter line seam allowance. So what we're going to do, I've only sewn one of these on, so just to show you as a quick demonstration, we'll go through. So you're going to do the same thing again. You'll line up the dashed lines with the edge of your strip, and all of these will sew on. Once you get your, I have all these sewn, I just haven't put the wing on there, but then with your little extra piece there, we would just continue to sew these all down. So I'm going to sew this one and cut it off, and we'll finish up the unit by sewing on that 4th piece, and we'll show you what that unit looks like. So I just sewed that one piece on, and we'll cut it off real close. You go iron it back. Okay, So then the same thing like we did on our AR unit, we're just gonna do the add a quarter ruler right here on line 4. Trim this off. And then on this side, we've got the little template pieces that we cut out of, on the bottom, it's S9. And then we've got on the other unit, which is the BR unit, we've got that 6th piece that gives you the pointed star in the middle. So we're just going to line this up, leaving about a 1/2 inch on either side. Sew that real quick. Okay, so then I'm going to go ahead and finish trimming off the rest of this. So you just follow along these outside lines here. That piece off. All right, and there's our finished piece. That's what it should look like, all trimmed up. So this is unit AL, and we're going to do, I'll show you the same thing on the bigger unit, which is the BR unit. And we'll finish that up and show you the top half, or actually this would be the bottom half of the diamond wedding ring, and then we'll be done with this block. So I'll be right back with the next unit, BR. All right, here is the BR unit, and I've sewn 3 strips on, and I've trimmed at the line number 3. I've used my add a quarter ruler trim there. So now the next step is to sew this on, and same thing again, just like I showed you the first time. The frown goes down, the smile goes on top, and we'll use a little bit of glue here. Glue it at the top corner. Just a little bit of glue, keeping it inside the seam allowance so it doesn't show on our finished piece. And okay. Same thing again, we're just going to sew along the 1/4 inch seam allowance. This one, the last unit we sewed down this way, but since this is on the opposite side, we're going to be starting at the bottom and going down to there. So I will show you at the sewing machine here. All right, since I'm sewing at the edge of a unit, I'm going to use a paper starter so my seams are a little nicer. Remember to switch it over to your 1/4 inch seam allowance, which I almost forgot, but I caught myself. So just going to go nice and slow on this outer edge, lining up the edge of my presser foot. I know some people like to use that purple thing as kind of to get in there with your finger, or a but I just like to use my fingers because I can get in there and adjust it as I need to. And it's not too terribly daunting as a curved seam. So there we go. That's what that one looks like. Nice 1/4 inch seam allowance here. If you flip it over, check your work, it should be sewn on that 1/4 inch line, which surprisingly mine looks pretty good. Sometimes you get off a little bit and that's okay, just as long as you keep your 1/4 inch seam allowance with the edge of the fabric. So let me go press it and we'll sew on these last couple pieces, and we'll be ready to sew in that background piece so we can get this other side finished. All right, here it is. Once I pressed it, the seam allowances go out nice and flat. And then we're going to do the same thing on this. When you sew it on the strip, you line up the dashed line with the edge of the strip and then sew all of them together. But for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm just going to sew this one piece on so we can finish up this unit and show you what it looks like all done. So let me sew on this piece and I'll press it and I'll come back and we'll sew on the last section 5 and section 6 together. Back with the 4th strip sewn on, and we're going to do section 5, which is this little triangle, and then we're going to do section 6, which is the point that's going to be at the bottom of our unit. So and we're going to line this piece up so there's about a 1/2 inch or so hanging off. And then if you look, flip this back, see this line here, we want to make sure that the fabric covers past this 1/4 inch seam allowance, which it does. It's quite a bit further back. So we'll sew that on. And again, just like on the BL unit, these lines crisscross here. So when you start sewing this, you want to start sewing a couple stitches prior to this dashed line and then sew all the way off the edge. And then when we come back to if you remember when we did our other BL unit, when you are, since this seam intersects that line, the fabric is sewn to the paper. So I fold the paper and the fabric back, then hold on to the paper with one hand and grab that seam and just gently pull it back, and it'll lay nice and flat. And then you trim that 1/4 inch off. Okay. And then this piece is our last piece, bright, bright blue. So we want to make sure that the fabric covers this piece right here. So we'll line this up with the edge and we'll go just a little further down. So that edge is covered, the point's covered here, there's plenty of fabric. So let me sew that. And that's what it should look like when you're done sewing. And we'll go ahead and trim off the rest of this unit real quick. And let's see. Make sure you don't trim off that little wing that you just sewed on. That would be bad. All right, so there's that unit. That's the BR unit. And this is the AL unit, which are your light fabrics. And then we will put a background piece in there and sew those together. And that's what that should look like when it's all done. So let's start. We start sewing on the smaller side first. And I have already sewn my basting stitches here. I'm going to sew my basting stitch onto this one, and then we'll sew this unit, or we'll sew this background piece on together, and then we should be done with unit A. So let's do that real quick. All right, basting stitches are sewn, and we need to take the papers off, and I do have a video that I'll link to on tips for taking off paper. But basically what you want to do is start with the last one that you just put on, which is section 5, and they come off. When you get to the TRP line, the basting stitch, just put your thumb or your finger right there, and you should be able to tear the paper right along that basting stitch line, and the papers come off. And then you'll have to deal with this seam that we did putting on that wing. That same thing, put your finger right by the basting stitch, tear the paper. Oops. That's something that I like to do. And when I get all my units sewn, I'll go get on a YouTube video or Netflix or something and sit there and pull all my papers off at one time. Okay, so again, we'll sew onto the smaller unit first and turn it this way. So we've got the frown, and then we've got the smile, and we want to match up the basting stitch, which is right here on my background piece, and right here, there. And I'll glue this corner down even, and up here at the corner, basically this basting stitch lines up with the corner. So we'll put a little piece of glue there and line that edge up so it's perfect. Get on the back. So I'm going to use a little piece of paper and set up my 1/4 inch seam again. Okay, so sewing on the paper, and then I'm going to slide that in there on top of the paper and match up my edge of my presser foot so I can get my 1/4 inch going. I'm just going to make sure that you hold down those seam allowances so they don't fold backwards. And I'm trying to keep my fingers out of the way for you, but I got to hold the fabrics too, so there we go. All right, so I got that sewn on, and the seam allowance goes to the inside, so we'll go press that in and we'll sew on the other piece. Okay, this is side 2, and we matched up the smart corner and the basting stitch lines, and we're going to sew our 1/4 inch seam allowance here. Alrighty, and drum roll. There we go. So let me go press that nice and flat, and I'll take you back to the board to show you what both pieces look like together. And this is what the piece looks like. So we just finished this unit here. This is your this is your AL and BR units with the lighter fabrics, and this dark, whatever color you chose to be your star in the middle is going to be here. So I'm going to have a blue star in the middle, and then this unit here is your AR and BL, which is the darker fabrics. So you should have the same fabrics across from each other. If you sew these all together and you find out that you've mismatched one, that just means you sewed your strips in the wrong order. But so they should look like this. So you're going to have a total of 6 of these units. We do not sew these together yet. I just wanted to show you what they look like. And then next unit that we're going to be working on is the B unit, which is the feathered star. So thanks for sticking with me through the video series on the Autumn Pines beginner paper piecing quilt. And this was our diamond wedding star rings. So this technique that we use to sew these strips on, this is something that can be used on just about any of the wedding star series. And we'll also be using the same technique when we go to do the border strips on our units D1 and D2, I believe is what they are, on the curved pieced unit on the border. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know what your progress is by leaving a comment down below, and tell me what your color scheme is. I'd love to know where you're watching from, and I'd love to know what colors you're using. So leave me a comment and like and share with your friends if you want them to learn some paper piecing techniques. And we will see you in a few days in the next video for Unit B. So get sewing all your diamond wedding ring arcs together, and the next unit will be our feathered star unit. So we will see you then.
I just wanted to show real quick what it looks like with all 6 units together in the middle. Obviously they're not sewn together, but that's what the center star will look like. Let me just pull one of these back. So these are the units that we just finished up and sewed together. So that's what it will look like in the center of the quilt with the blue star.